Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. As mentioned earlier this week on my Twitter, X account, as well as my YouTube community section and Patreon, I'll be taking my regular summer hiatus, so for the next few weeks there won't be any videos posted unless something crucially important comes up. But since I won't be presenting any new content for a while, I decided that rather than do a crime report, instead I'd tell you what I thought I'd like to leave you with during this period. It's always the right time to make our demands. Let no one tell you any different. Getting you comfortable with that idea is a large part of what the black media does. When it comes time for black people to make demands, we get this rump contingent of fools who give us a million reasons why we shouldn't. And they always try to make their treason and cowardice sound pragmatic somehow. They call it playing the game, or you gon' mess it up for the rest of us. More recently, they've taken up another phrase, a chess move. Now, the sad truth is, most black people are not at all fooled by these dissemblers. Most black people are fully aware that these folks who come among us to tell us stop rocking the boat, they're not doing it to help us. But most black people are scared to challenge white power, and that includes their bootlicking surrogates. So most black folks are scared to stand up for themselves even when they know what they're hearing is wrong. They'll just readily accept any line of rhetoric that allows them to feel like something other than a coward. That's where the black media comes in. Cowardice is a sin, and part of our function is to make sure that we convict you of those sins so you stop doing it. This is why the turn the other cheek part of the Bible is memorized for most Negroes. Meanwhile, the part about the Bible that says contend for the faith or go and buy a sword, that part we conveniently forget. When we make demands, it typically follows an escalatory ladder. Long story short, we make demands and white power tries to ignore us. If the demands persist, they send in the bootlicks and shills to try to dissuade us and sow confusion. If that fails, then the white media has to step in and attack us, though never directly. But if our opposition spreads, then they'll directly confront us, often with criminal charges, if not try to kill someone. And then if that doesn't work, only then do they consider conceding in part or in total. Black people have never gotten anything by playing the game, or any other sort of asinine chess move. You see, those kind of things may help the Jay-Z's and the Oprah Winfreys of the world and all the other sellouts who sold their souls to white power, but it does nothing for us. Colin Kaepernick has been gone from the NFL for years now, so when does Jay-Z's chess move begin to benefit anyone other than himself? See, this is a guy who thinks that he's going to be an NFL team owner one day, so he wants to get in good with the white powers that be. Now, while some people may try to claim, well, every group's got some folks among them who work against the interests of the collective, the truth of the matter is black people are unique in that our turncoats, sellouts, and bootlicks are protected by the dominant society. No other group has sanctioned sellouts among their ranks. They're free to deal with them themselves, and they're not protected by the powers that be. Now you got these self-interested bootlicks who have the nerve to wag their fingers at us. Have you ever seen any of the bootlicks featured on white media who push our demands? They don't do that. Because that's their job description, to pay phony lip service to their own toothless version of black. But theirs is a blackness that makes no demands, that only stands for what white power wants, and mouths some empty platitudes about recognizing our humanity and other touchy-feely chatter that means nothing. Now, I could give less than a damn if any white supremacist or white supremacist sympathizer doesn't like me. The favor of white power is totally meaningless. All I care about is making sure that white power can't do anything against me. And that's something white power isn't about to do willingly, so we must take on this enemy and face them down. A lot of people don't understand that there's all kinds of psychic benefits that go along with being part of the black media, that go along with standing for black empowerment. I get up every day thinking of the most insulting, most degrading, most condescending, in short, the most truthful things that I can say about white supremacists and the bootlicks and shills, agents and plants. They spend all their time attacking us constantly with lies. So we've earned the right to expose them with a moment of truth. We give them no respect because they deserve none. So this is part of the black media's crucial role, to encourage black people to speak the truth and to no longer bite their tongues. Places like this is where we have our say. Part of setting up the racial pyramid under white supremacy was to make it where a number of these non-white groups, or at least groups that are not classified as white, would still go along with the white power structure precisely because they perceive themselves to be getting some benefits from it. Sure, they don't get as many benefits as those higher on the ladder than themselves, But at the very least, they get more than the people under them, and everybody gets more than black people do, and for them, that's enough. They think that they've found a comfortable place under white supremacy. And the same way that the dominant society knows that all of their position and privilege in the society was handed to them because of this artificial racial pyramid, these non-white groups who actually have signed on to it, they also understand the exact same factor is true for them as well. That's why they fight against our demands. And if they actually do claim that we have the right to make demands, then why is it that they never do what we tell them to do? In reality, their actions tell the story. We don't have the right to get anything or even say anything that we should have. Now, it is against this backdrop that the black media arose, because there was no way that white power was going to do anything to make it where the people it had been exploiting and using for 500 years would actually be able to speak up in their own interest for their own affairs. But tragically, we have a bunch of these Negroes out here who actually don't want to be part of black empowerment either. The white media loves those guys and puts them on television precisely because they don't threaten the existing structure. But we do. I made a personal commitment 3 years back when I began this new format of posting content 6 days a week. It's a hell of a workload, to be honest, especially considering that everyone in the new Voices of Black media, from Brother Tariq to Tarian Rain to Lisa Cabrera to Chris Crazy House to myself, we're all one-man operations. White power makes it where these little podunk content creators go from being one-person shows to having hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars put into them overnight. I knew that after nearly 15 years in the trenches, taking up such an ambitious format change would be a huge task. So why would anyone do that? 2 reasons. 1, they say that life isn't certain, that only death is, and that being the case, if you don't know when you're going to die, you better make sure you get in whatever you want to say now while you can. Tupac Shakur knew that the wolves were circling before his death. He knew that they were getting closer, and that if he had anything meaningful to say, he better go ahead and say it while he could, which he did. As Tupac sufficiently put it, I will spark the mind that changes the world. Now, before anyone asks, no, I don't have any sort of situation going on that might shorten my life, at least none that I know of. But I do know that none of us is promised to see tomorrow. One of the biggest failings that black people have had for the longest time is we do not document or chronicle our lives. Not to toot our own horn, but ours has actually been the greatest comeback story in the history of humankind. And yet so little of it has been documented because apparently most of us couldn't be bothered to do so. Now, obviously, a large part of that is when you're a people who are oppressed, when you're facing life and death situations every single day, you don't have a whole lot of time to sit down and say, while I was busy fighting the latest battle for my survival, let me go ahead and tell you about it. That's obvious. But the truth of the matter is, by not telling our story, what we are doing is telling future generations that our existence wasn't very important, wasn't very valuable, and apparently we didn't do very much. Now, none of that is true, of course. But the problem is, without leaving a record of any sort, what other conclusion are they to draw? And this also happens to go for our intellectual resources as well. What did we think about the world that we were in, the battles that we had to wage? I want to make a contribution to that. That's the reason why I took up this, at least in part. I do know that none of us is promised to see tomorrow. At my age, I've seen enough examples of people who could have contributed so much more to make a lasting impact for their cause, to leave a legacy of thought, memory, and analysis that others after them could have followed and benefited from, but didn't. The entire reason we're able to venerate and use the lessons of our grandmaster teachers in our daily lives is precisely because they left such a huge body of work for us to study and be inspired by. Now, obviously, I do not put myself in the same category, nor do I deserve to be mentioned in the same category as any of our grandmaster teachers. Occasionally, I'll see some of the family who listen to me and use that phrase to describe me, and while I'm very flattered by it, the truth is I'm not worthy of it. The Dr. John Henrik Clarks and the Dr. Francis Cress Welsings and all the other true grandmaster teachers, they did it when it was difficult to do. There was no internet, and certainly no place like YouTube that made it possible to gather large numbers of like-minded people together to hear this message. If you couldn't get on TV or radio, then people didn't hear your message. And those people, those intellectual pioneers, had to work for decades, trying to overcome a white media that was attacking them, and truth be told, a black population that really wasn't receptive to the truths that they were bringing. Our heroes and sheroes fought those battles before the digital avenues that we have available to us even existed, and as I see it, we owe it to them to take the banner that they raised and run with it. It was hard for them to do it. And while what we do is certainly no walk in the park, it's also not the untold crucible that our forebears had to endure. We owe that to them. Another of our Grandmaster teachers who doesn't get mentioned nearly enough is the late Dr. William Mackey. Dr. Mackey conducted a lecture shortly before his death, and in it he gave a lament about the baby boomers. He didn't call them out by name, but it was obvious who he was talking about. Dr. Mackey was of the World War II generation, and he lamented that the younger generation hadn't taken up the mantle that he, Dr. Clark, and others had carried. While it was true that these Grandmaster teachers had put independent black thought on the map, it was also true that the movement they began would die out unless the next generation stepped in to continue the work. Finally, he remarked that because the boomers had dropped the ball, it would be another 20 years before the movement was able to move forward again. And he was right. When you look at the period from the death of Dr. John Henrik Clark up until the time when the new voices of black media had finally built enough momentum to be heard, it was a few years short of 20 years. People can be angry at me for calling out the boomers, but tell me, with only one or two exceptions, can you tell me of any boomers who have been active in this black empowerment space? Which of the black boomers can we call a Grandmaster teacher? Damned few. It's usually the World War II generation or the silent generation who we call our Grandmaster teachers. Now, how many Gen Xers and even a couple of millennials have stepped into the void left after the passing of our true Grandmaster teachers? In fact, practically all of the new voices of black media, at least the most notable ones, are Gen X, but right behind them happen to be the millennials. There's a reason for that. And as one of the Gen Xers who brought my own admittedly imperfect effort to this work, I am proud of what I've done over the last 15 plus years to promote the interest of my people. I wouldn't have it any other way, and I know you wouldn't either. There is something that I would like to say for the millennials who are among the new voices of black media. It's going to come a time when the Gen Xers are going to begin to flame out, and that being the case, it's going to be the millennials and the Gen Zers who will be the ones who have to carry the ball. And that being the case, please be on guard against this absurd fiction being put out by the white right that the 1990s were some period of colorblind, race-neutral harmony, and that this proved that people are able to just get along because they weren't so uptight about everything, especially not about race. Why? During the 1990s, that was a time when race wasn't really such a big issue. Now, when they say that, they're ignoring things like, say, the Rodney King beating that resulted in one of the worst race riots in American history in 1991. And speaking of getting along, that phrase became a punchline after Rodney King himself was damn near on camera crying, saying, "Can't we all just get along?" The Rodney King beating and the LA riots that followed, that was how the color-blind everyone was getting along because race wasn't such a big issue 1990s began. That was the beginning of the 1990s. That's how the decade started. And it continued with Sister Souljah, who made international headlines when she told the dominant society some unpleasant truths about themselves that they didn't want to hear. And she timed that perfectly, doing it during the 1992 presidential campaign. Then candidate Bill Clinton himself denounced Sister Souljah as part of his campaign. He wanted to show all of those white centrists, see, I'm not going to let some Negro sit here and just say whatever. Clarence Thomas claimed that the tough questioning that he received during his confirmation hearing was a high-tech lynching. This coming from one of the most notorious bootlicks who ever came out of the United States ever. He was playing the race card long before idiots like Jeffrey Jerkum Tubin coined that phrase. And why did Jeffrey Tubin invent the phrase the race card? Because he didn't like the outcome of the O.J. Simpson trial, which was saturated in racism from the LAPD. In that trial, it was a recording of now former LAPD police officer Mark Furman, who was the lead detective on the O.J. Simpson case, who was recorded gleefully admitting that he racially profiled black motorists and that he wished that he could put all the black people in America on a giant boat and then burn it at sea. Johnny Cochran's defense for O.J. was that Mr. Simpson was the target of racist lying cops who hated black people, and by exposing the lead detective on the case as a psychopathic racist, Cochran brilliantly proved his point, and Simpson was rightfully acquitted. But the white media was furious at this outcome. They had been huffing their own farts and telling themselves that because they saturated the world with articles, propaganda, masquerading as so-called news pieces that said, O.J. did it, they figured that they could mind control the world, and Simpson would easily be railroaded right into a prison cell. They would get their comforting conviction, and they would be assured that black people knew their place. But thanks to Johnny Cochran, the opposite happened. And you didn't see anyone talking about how racially colorblind and racially harmonious America was. They said, oh, this is the problem with America. Race is the biggest issue. And let's also not forget that the 1990s was when the Michael Jackson trial first took place, too. Also, Arsenio Hall was the biggest name in late-night television. That is, before he decided to have Louis Farrakhan on his show. After that, he got canceled. They claimed it was for other reasons, but we all know that his having Farrakhan on the show and actually letting Farrakhan speak his piece, that was the real reason Arsenio Hall's show got canceled. Now, there's plenty of other examples that I could give you, but I think you get the point. This is for all my millennials out there. There were a ton of racial incidents during the 1990s. The 1990s was one of the most racially hostile periods in American history. But all of this has been memory holed by certain right-of-center millennials being paid by these white right-wing think tanks, people who were born in the late 1980s, early 90s, and who are trying to rewrite the history that happened in living memory. These are individuals who are trying to mythologize their own youth into being some perfect time in their lives when it was anything but. These kids were not out in the real world. They were in school, watching cartoon and reading comic books, hanging out with friends, and not in the real world where their white classmates had white privilege to open doors for them while their black classmates were locked out. If you ask Gen Xers, they tend to lionize the 1970s and 80s too to an extent, hell, even the early 90s. Where do you think Freaknik came from? A lot of Gen Xers took that free love, sleep around with everybody crap that they saw their boomer parents doing in the 60s, 70s, and early 80s, and they just put a hip-hop spin on it. But it was the same old degeneracy. No matter how dewy-eyed these millennial mouthpieces may try to pretend to be, their phony nostalgia doesn't mean that the 90s were actually some kind of perfect period of American history. What it really means is that every generation imagines their youth to be a golden age when it was anything but. And that brings me to the second reason why I decided to greatly expand what I was doing to a 6-day-a-week format. Because my people deserve to be heard. I like the idea that every weekday you could begin your morning with a strong dose of black empowerment, whether you're making breakfast or commuting to work or wherever. And every Sunday evening you can also get the same. A number of new black media voices post on Sundays, so that's the day to get a king-size helping of black media. Since the white media has the reach and the resources to be able to make sure that you start your day and have to go through all of it hearing nothing but lies, I thought that it was important that, at least in my own modest way, that I try to make sure you start off your day with the black truth. If for whatever reason I was no longer able to post any more of these truths, then I want to know that I said everything that I ever wanted to say. That's why I make it a point to touch on as many different subjects as possible. It helps me to make sure that I cover all my bases. See, the enemy understands the importance of that principle. Rush Limbaugh was the quintessential white media racist. He made an entire lucrative career out of it, and the white advertisers and corporate backers made him filthy stinking rich as a result. They wanted his lies out there, but more than that, he wanted his message out there. Do I think that you need someone like myself to help inform your sensibilities? Actually, yes. The entire reason that we revere the Grandmaster teachers is precisely because they helped us to understand things that we wouldn't have gotten on our own. And on top of that, we are never going to be empowered as long as we have 50 million different versions of the truth. There's a lot of people out there slamming their gums who don't know what the world they're talking about. We need to make it very clear there is a right path, not 50 million of them. A teacher doesn't just give you information. That's called indoctrination. What a teacher does is they show you how to think. And that brings me to a third unofficial reason why I changed my format. Because there's an old saying that if you can't explain something in terms that even a child can understand, then that means you don't truly understand it yourself. Now, that's not a perfect axiom, but the essential point is sound. Part of why clowns like Bethany Mandel got humiliated so easily is because they don't actually know why they believe any of the gibberish they spout. See, that's the advantage that you have under white privilege. There's no penalty that goes along with not knowing what you're talking about. Under white supremacy, you can have people who will hire you no matter how much of a failure you are, like Christopher Rufo, and they'll put you on TV or in print simply because you say what they want to hear. It doesn't have to make sense. It only has to make organized white power happy, and that's enough. When I took up the 6-day-a-week format, a lot of people cautioned me that I would never be able to keep up such a furious pace, that I would burn out after 6 months. That was 3 years ago. Yes, you do have to put out a lot of work, But either you're serious about this or you're not, and I'm dead serious about it. I don't know what the future holds, but I know that I want to be a part of it and I want to influence it. So this is part of my own modest effort to do that. But it's not my effort alone. This is also yours as well. We are the black media, and by we, that means you. I've said it 1,000,000 times, and I'm going to keep saying it until you say it too. Without you, we don't exist. The only reason that we're behind the mic and relevant is because you chose to listen to us and to help amplify this message, which is actually your message. So please, don't ever think that the black media doesn't include you. Since you're the ones who are responsible for this, the message isn't the medium. You are. I'm proud of the work that we have put in. And while I've been able to say a lot, I also have much more that I want to express, and I will in the years to come, or should I say, we will. During my time away, I'm sure the family's going to handle garbage disposal for the vermin who lurk around here. And also, if you're not a regular viewer of Tari and Rain's channel, or Lisa Cabrera, Chris Crazy House, or any of the other veterans of the new black media, then you owe it to yourselves to become regular viewers of their content, especially Brother Tarian and Sister Cabrera. Black empowerment never truly takes a holiday. So while I won't be posting for the next few weeks, that's not to say that I won't be watching. In the meanwhile, I think you would also benefit by taking this as a chance to get caught up on the briefings in the archives of this channel. Not only can you find out details about events and people that gets ignored by the white media, but as the black media, we make it our job to try to tell you what's going to happen weeks, months, or even years before it happens. So if you're new here, you'll probably be surprised at how many of my briefings from several months, if not years ago, are just now coming to pass, or how many of them told you something that you didn't know. And for me, that's the most gratifying aspect of what I do. From the beginning, I've said that black people deserve and need news and information that is every bit as thorough, every bit as prescient, every bit as cutting edge as what the white media does. Black people above all others need to know what's truly going on and to be forewarned about what's coming. There is no law that says our people must remain on this earth, but there's also no law that says we have to sit on our hands and fade out of existence either. And there's also no law that says we have to suffer in silence. But even if there was, we wouldn't obey it. Because if we cannot have our power, at the very least, we will definitely have our say. I am both privileged and grateful that for 17 years, you've given me not just your attention, but also your trust. I work hard to earn it, because as black people, we should have a media that operates in our interest. Working together, we will continue to do so. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors. Starlet Thompson, James Brown, Josh Heath, Kenneth Prescia, and Jerlene Harris. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.